Welcome home, where we provide information, inspiration, and motivator after motivator after motivator here on America's Next. I have Emily Stochel here with me today. How you doing, Emily?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me, Cedric.
Absolutely. Now, how do I pronounce your last name correctly?
Stochel.
Stochel.
You did a great job.
Okay. How are you this morning, and where are you this morning?
I'm doing well. I'm in Tacoma, Washington this morning.
Wow. Is it beautiful up there? Do you guys got snow right now?
We don't right now in Tacoma, but yeah, it's still beautiful.
Okay. What's it like there?
It's very cold right now. My roommates are struggling with the cold, but you know, a lot of Christmas lights and everything, so it's pretty beautiful.
Okay. Now, is that your place of birth? Are you from there?
I was born in Seattle, so I'm very close to where I grew up. Yeah.
What was it like for you growing up in Seattle?
Well, I grew up in Bellevue, which is close to Seattle. I was just born in Seattle, but growing up in Seattle area was it was hard for me, definitely. I had what people call like a broken family, and so I'm not sure how much to go into that right now, but basically it was a struggle, and I didn't always spend a lot of my time in Bellevue because once I went into foster care, I was in Oregon and then Utah and then came back here. So been all around.
Wow, you went from Oregon to Utah and then back. So yeah, you did do some moving around. How did that moving around? How did that impact you? Would you say?
It definitely taught me how to like transition really quick. I think a lot of my childhood, I didn't really have time to think about things, so it's constantly just thinking about surviving and getting through the next thing. And so I think I find myself now as an adult still sort of trying to be conscious of that and really take in things that are happening and processing as I go through them instead of like waiting for it all to build up.
Mm-hmm. So you learned over time to kind of process things before they become a little bit too heavy for you.
Mm-hmm. And just how to adapt to different situations really quick. That is one of my strengths that I got from it. But, you know, I think a lot of people who go through trauma think that they have to do that all the time. And that's not necessarily the case.
Mm-hmm. You're absolutely right. I think that sometimes we get so caught up in just absorbing everything that we don't also consider how it hinders us, you know, moving forward. Because tomorrow you might have to do something bigger and better than you've ever done before. But if tomorrow you actually can't get out of bed because you're so overwhelmed because you got a 20-ton weight on you, then that's not good for you either.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, what were some of the experiences that resulted in you going into foster care?
Yeah, so actually CPS, Child Protective Services, was involved in my life starting when I was like 8. So my family always had trouble. There was some domestic violence in the household and a lot of mental health issues with both of my parents, really. And so that's what first sort of got them involved. There was also some sexual abuse, and it was from 2 different family members, but at the time, CPS only knew about one, which is my older brother. And he recently actually just got arrested for all of that. And since no one knew about that, I finally made a report like 13, 14 years later, which was earlier this year. But you know, there was other sort of dysfunction that made them get involved. And then when my mom was like, I was living with my mom and my sibling, and her mental health started to deteriorate, which is how I ended up out of state the first time. She actually took me across state lines because in Washington, if you're over the age of 13, you have the right to refuse inpatient treatment unless it's court ordered. So she took me across state lines to like basically get rid of me. And then, yeah, did that twice. And so that engaged CPS more too. And I later found out that was also because CPS has started an investigation and she didn't really want to deal with it. So that was sort of her way of, moving on with her life. But,
Yeah. What was going on in your broader community? What were your neighbors like? What were the people who were living around you? What were they like?
it was really sort of standoffish. Not to say that, those people are generally like that, but I think we lived in a really upper class sort of neighborhood. We were definitely the odd ones out in our block. Like we had the smallest house and like all these different things. But needless to say, it was a very like upper class white neighborhood. And we had some neighbors that we like hung out with, especially because there were other kids on our block. But really, mostly people kept to themselves, and there wasn't that much like community. It wasn't sort of a mentality that was shared. We didn't really know each other that well. So I think everyone either just didn't know what was happening or sort of just kept to themselves. So that's sort of what it was like.
Do you feel that people need to be more aware of what's happening in their communities, regardless of whether or not they live in an affluent community?
Yeah, definitely. I think that would like help protect kids and just other people and really get to know, like it helps foster those relationships, which are so important. I think we get caught up in this idea of really not knowing and not realizing the complexity of other people. And I think in order to do that, you really have to strive to get to know people. So I think it could be really helpful.
I'm really interested in this dynamic that you're talking about right now. I also am the type of person who thinks, or I at least have a feeling, I know better, but I still have a feeling that everything's okay around here. When I'm driving through like a really nice neighborhood, I'm thinking like everything's okay around here. Everybody's safe around here. And what you're pointing out today is you just can't assume that everybody's okay, and particularly that all the children are safe just because this is a so-called nice neighborhood.
Yeah.
And we've got to pay attention. We've got to pay attention to our neighbors a little bit better than that.
Yeah, definitely. And I'd say like go beyond that and, go out of your way to create those relationships and take care of each other. And, I think there's sort of, I've seen it both ways where, some neighbors will like bring each other food and like schedule like hangouts and stuff like that and dinners. And I think that can be really healthy. Because oftentimes we keep our home lives very private, but that's where a lot of this stuff goes on, especially with like child abuse and things like that. So yeah.
Absolutely. Always remembering that a child who's been mistreated is actually crying out for help. They want you to get involved and to witness and to call the authorities to help save their life.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I recently moved into a neighborhood where for like the whole first week, people were bringing us donuts and tacos from the new restaurant down the street, and just nice, kind gestures like that. And it just it made me feel like, wow, I'm in an actual community. And I think we need to do more of that, because if I go to drop off some cupcakes or something like that, and I see that you all are totally in need, or that the children are totally in danger, then that might be the gesture that can make the difference in somebody's life.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. So what was your mentality like then for yourself in maybe middle school? What were you thinking?
I was really just thinking like, don't fall apart. Like you have to just keep going. And I don't know, like I knew that if I told anyone what was going on, like in the house, then there was a strong possibility I would be separated from my family. And it was really mixed because I really struggled with my parents because they didn't provide what I needed, obviously, like emotionally, physically, really any way. But I had a really strong relationship with my twin sister and, somewhat with my older brothers. It was also confusing because, there was that sexual abuse that was going on. But at the same time, my older brother was the closest thing I had to a dad, because my dad really wasn't that present at all. And, with the domestic violence and stuff, I felt like they were mostly focused on their relationship and we really didn't talk most days. So, yeah, there were some really strange and hard dynamics for sure.
How did that translate into your school performance?
Actually, it's really interesting because a lot of people are similar like me, where their home life could be falling apart, but they can get straight A's. And in middle school, that wasn't necessarily the case. That was more like later on in high school and college. But in middle school, it was tough. It was hard to focus, and I was really misdiagnosed. And same with my siblings, with ADHD and even some other things. One of the things with my mom is she has very severe mental health issues. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Munchausen by proxy or like narcissistic personality disorder, but we think that she probably has one or two of those things. And so that it was like there was always something going on not related to her that needed to be tended to. So we were put on meds at a very early age, like kindergarten, and had really like negative side effects, like throwing up every day at one point, and not really seeming to care that that was happening, but continuing to put us on these meds. So really naturally that it was tough to really focus on anything. There were a lot of emotional things, a lot of physical things. So yeah.
Did you know, because you're the type of person who, like you said, you were focused on not falling apart, which means you understood that you had a job to do in your life and that what you were going through wasn't going to stop you from doing that particular job. Did you know that you didn't need medication, and did you feel that you were being improperly medicated?
Yes, 100%. Like there wasn't a doubt in my mind. I knew without a doubt I didn't need that. And I was also like put in special education, which, there's nothing wrong with that. I get it. Like the way that school is taught is people are learned so differently. So it's not a bad thing. But I knew that I was learning fine in a classroom and, I was comprehending the information, all of that. So it was, yeah, to me, it was hard because I knew everything. I had a lot of self-coherency to know that, I knew what I needed and it wasn't necessarily that.
Let's take this moment and raise awareness about young people who are in the system who are given medication because people don't have relationships with the young person that will result in the young person behaving the way that people want them to behave.
Yes.
And so they get medicated. But like you're saying, you didn't need medication, and not only did you not need medication, you knew that you didn't need medication.
Mm-hmm.
Do you see that as something that's a pattern across kids across America?
Absolutely. Yeah. I've worked in this foster care realm for like 7 or 8 years now. And I see it a lot, especially with teenagers in the system. And I think part of what happens, and maybe this might just be my opinion, but something I notice is that teenagers, generally they can be a little bit sassy. Sometimes they can act like normal teenagers, but in the system, when, they don't have that permanent caregiver, like it tends to get over exaggerated and people tend to act very quick to medicate these kids instead of, just say that it's normal and sort of just work through it and actually like, try and build a relationship. So that's just something I've observed.
Sure. Have you observed a connection between young people who are given medication in some instances who don't need that medication? Now, we're not talking about everybody.
Mm-hmm.
Some people do need the medication. But in Emily's firsthand account in her life, she knew that she didn't need the medication. She wasn't having the effective counseling, the effective conversations that could help her have a higher level of understanding. She was just given medication instead. Now, do you see a connection between people who are given medication when they're young and those same people using pills as drugs as they become older teens and young adults?
I'm sure that happens a lot. It's not something that I've experienced a ton, like through my work and personally, but I'm sure it happens a ton.
I'm gonna say that I've seen how young people who are medicated and sometimes over medicated. We got young people out here taking 4 or 5 pills 3 times a day. When they as they get older, they start looking for medication. So now you've gone from how whatever time you went into this system to the time that you age out or get adopted, you've been taking medication all these years, sometimes a decade or more. Once you get released by the system, you become so-called independent or just out there as an adult by yourself. You're still looking for medication, and you just can't go into the local drugstore and say, "Hey, you got medication for me?" And so you end up doing drugs. Now, I wanted to raise awareness about that because it's another part of our reality. It's part of what goes on in the system. And when you said that you could tell you didn't need that, I had to go into that. Now, you still managed to get good grades. What were your goals as you went into high school?
Yeah, my goals as I went into high school, one was to finish high school. I part of going into those facilities was like I ended up attending like 4 different schools in less than 2 years, I think. So a lot of that was making sure that the credits like transferred and that I was getting what I earned. Um, and changing my learning styles too, because I was used to learning in a traditional classroom, but then when I was at the facilities, there was a lot of online learning involved. So just learning how to adapt to that. And my goal at the time, like when I was at the first couple facilities, I wanted to go to Juilliard actually. Like wanted to be a musician. It was something that I was really passionate about. But sort of as I realized, like I just had to go along with everything in the facility because I wasn't exiting unless, my parents were pulling me, which
Right.
seemed unlikely, or something else. So I narrowed it down and I was like, okay, well, I just want to graduate. Like, I'm not going to be someone that, doesn't finish high school and just gets lost no matter what's happening. Like, and I realize for some people it's just not an option. But for me, I felt like it was. And so I told myself I'm going to do whatever it takes. And then, once I finally turn 18, I'm going to turn around and like fix this because there's so much wrong with these systems. But at the same time, I knew that there were so many different perspectives that I needed to learn before just jumping in and helping because I'm very aware of like unintended consequences. And so my goal is to like avoid those. And I know I'm not the only person that's experienced these things. So I wanted to like learn more from, other people who've experienced similar things, but also from social workers and the system as a whole, all the different players, things like that.
You knew when you were in high school that you were going to come back and make a difference in the same system that you were growing out of.
I had no doubt. I knew it was something I couldn't escape. Like I find a lot of people, it's sort of like I've seen mostly two different mentalities. Like one is they look away and they never go back. They just keep going. They like do something completely unrelated, like engineering or like computer science or something like that. And then there's a other like demographic where they can't escape it. And that was me. Like I think there was maybe a few days that I like tried to escape and not think about it, but it just doesn't work. Like I had a lot of trauma that I was like dealing with and PTSD. So I was like, okay, if I can't escape this, like I'm going to take reins of this and, control it. And then also realizing that if you don't change something really terrible that happened or, try and transform that, that's all it is. Like you can't make it anything else. If you just look away and keep going, it's just a bad experience. So I think part of this is just saying, yeah, it was super bad, but at the same time, like I'm going to make sure that other people don't have to go through that and transform it and, use it to like build my power and my voice and plant seeds of like wisdom and perspective to other people who have more power too to change these systems.
Sure. You said that you wanted to go to Juilliard. Did you start playing music along the way? Did you discover that you have musical talents at some point?
Yeah, well, my family was actually very musical. There were like I have some positive memories for sure, like growing up, and it was a family of 6, so we like, gather around the fireplace and play like the Beatles, and we each grew up very early playing an instrument. Like mine was keyboard, piano. starting in kindergarten. And then all my siblings played violin, and then my dad played guitar and he sang. So we all just grew up very musical. And I remember like getting my first keyboard in like preschool and just being mesmerized. So I spent a lot of time in the midst of like all the family chaos focusing on that and just really building my skills that way and singing. So then in like grade school, I joined choirs and everything. And yeah, just kept building from there.
That warms my heart. Just thinking that you all were actually a beautiful family. It sounds like you all could sit in your own living room and rock out, you know, and that you all really loved each other. There was a level of genius among you and with you, and that part right there is probably what kind of held y'all together. Like we're all messed up a little bit, but we are talented and we are intelligent, and that one piece is what we're holding on to. Now, as you eventually went into foster care, you must have been thinking, "Gosh, something needs to be done about mental health in our families."
Yes, definitely. Yeah, I don't even know how to approach commenting on that because it was really gradual, I guess. And so the music, I think, and that dynamic that the music brought kept us together for a while. But at a certain point, I was like, I can't do this. So, you know, I think also like involuntarily being placed in those facilities, it really,
Mhm.
things got to a point where it couldn't be the way that it was. Um, so yeah, things definitely took a turn then, I'd say.
Any ideas? This is just a ballpark question of what could have been done to assist in the mental health challenges in your family, or just in people that you experienced along the way. What do you think that we could be doing? What could we be thinking about when it comes to mental health to actually help people before their kids get put into foster care?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it is the lens that we look at it with. Like, I think instead of focusing it on like what's wrong, like it could be focused more on compassion and, you know, if people are getting their needs met, because I think that was overlooked almost every time for me.
Mm.
And if we had more of a need-based focus and strength-based, I think a lot of maybe our issues could have been potentially resolved. Although with my family, I don't know. That I guess I see that more with the kids that I work with now.
Mhm, mhm, mhm.
So yeah, that's what I'd have to say.
Okay. Now, what did you do after high school?
Yeah, after high school, I went to college at Western Washington University, and I studied human services, which is social work. And I got the chance to study abroad while I was in college too, in South Africa, and sort
Nice.
of evaluate their child welfare system and learn a little bit. Of course, I only got a glimpse of it. I was there for about 2 months, and it was, yeah, I learned a ton by being there and just seeing how different, more like collective communities like focus and influence their child welfare systems. So it was really neat to be able to experience that. And then I graduated as the outstanding graduate for my major too, which is really, really exciting. And yeah, so then with that, I just decided to, you know, keep doing this work. Thankfully, through my internships in the program, I secured a couple jobs and was just trying to like absorb as much as I could from those different experiences and taking every perspective with me. So I guess from there, it's just been learning a lot and trying to, now that I have like 7 or 8 years of experience and wisdom from these different areas, like incorporating that in the work that I do now. Yeah.
Ladies and gentlemen, drop a number one in the chat if you're proud of Emily. Drop a one in the chat if you're proud of Emily. She breezed through some tremendous accomplishments in her life. And I'm going to slow it down, rewind the tape, and unpack some of that. Because that was absolutely phenomenal what you grew up to do. You never stopped. You kept your eyes on a prize, you remained positive, you kept working. And then you ended up going to study abroad. Now, you say that you went to Africa. Do you know so many people want to leave the country? So many people just want to leave their city. They want to leave their state. They want to leave their street. Young people growing up in Washington, Seattle right now, wishing they could leave their street someday. You got to go to Africa and look at what they were doing in the child welfare space. Can you describe that to us and educate us on what they're doing? Does it look better? Does it look worse? What's happening over there?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I specifically worked at a drop-in center there where kids would come if they were like being abused or neglected, abandoned, anything like that, or just didn't have anywhere to go. And so what I saw was, it was so incredibly interesting. Like the sense of time at that specific area was just so different than here. I find here that we are always rushing and we have to be somewhere at a certain time. There it's just like you do what you can when you can. And that's really the best definition I can come up with, like while I'm thinking about it. And again, this is just from my very small experience, like being there for a couple months. But really, it was interesting to see how the community came together to take care of these kids. And it wasn't so much like survival of the fittest, like you have your family, I have mine, like figure it out. So I definitely think that was something I took away, is just more of that collective approach to caring for these children, and having trust in each other, like as neighbors there, for example, and taking care of one another, and more sacrifice. Like there's a lot more sacrifice.
What do you mean by that?
I mean, I guess people there, from what I observed, they're more willing to deviate from what they would normally do on a day-to-day to help out someone else, or just take ownership of, other things going on. And I find here that people are really focused on what they want and what they want to do. We're a lot more individualistic, I think, and focused on that. And I think our systems teach us to be that way. So it's just interesting to evaluate from that end.
Major takeaway from that for me is that we've got to be that village, like we were talking about in the beginning of the show. We've got to be the type of neighbors who think about one another. We've got to think about the children in our neighborhood, the children who are in our families, who are not necessarily in our homes. We've got to be more community minded, and when we do that, we can make a difference without necessarily having a whole lot of money. We're talking to Emily today, and we'll be right back with more of her tremendous story. America's Next Motivator, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 5 p.m. Eastern, Tuesday and Thursday at 10 a.m. Eastern. America's Next Motivator, hosted by me, Cedric Riley, and sponsored by the Pride Empowerment Network. And we're back. Emily, how you feeling out there?
Feeling good. How about you?
I'm feeling good. I'm feeling happy. I'm feeling happy for you. I'm feeling happy about the things that you're saying. And I'm just inspired at what you were able to do in your time on this earth so far. So now, without a doubt, talk to us about how your relationship with your friends and the people that you had good relationships with, How did that relationship grow as you began to do bigger and better things with your life?
Yeah, it's actually crazy because I think I've been really careful about sharing my own personal experiences until this court stuff, like when I filed the report against my oldest brother for the sexual abuse about a year or two ago, I think. And that was because I really didn't want my personal experience to get in the way of, you know, to have bias seep in with my clients. But I've learned how to really be mindful of that and make sure that that doesn't happen, or at least happens in a way that's productive, where, I'm able to think about, more than someone who like hasn't had those experiences might be able to think about in terms of what that person is going through. But once I did file that report and go through with that whole process, I found I actually gained a lot more confidence and self-assurance about myself. And I realized more like nothing that happened to me was my fault. And that's something that I struggled with a lot, I think, before, because it just seemed like everything was happening to me. So it must have been my fault somehow. Um, and I think those were the messages I was getting to from all the abuse and neglect and all of that. So I think as, I started to get more, like find my voice and speak about it more, I became more unapologetic of like who I am and, how I got to where I am. And my friends really started noticing that too. And I definitely couldn't have done it without their encouragement. So I think, there have been a lot of people like my housemates who've been really there for me and supportive along the way, and a really good therapist. And definitely people who've come in my life as like mentors or the closest thing I have to family. And yeah, one thing that one of my mentors told me that I still take with me is, like, she told me, don't have anyone who's just okay in your life. Like, life is too short to have people who don't motivate you and don't support you, and vice versa. So only have people in your life who are either good or exceptional. And I think since I've really stuck to that and, severed some biological ties that really weren't good and healthy for me, I've really grown and been able to do a lot more things that I wouldn't have otherwise been able to do. Like, I'm writing a book right now, so that's one of the focuses right now, and it'll be all about my experience, the experiences of some of my clients that I've worked with while like maintaining confidentiality, and then lastly, how we can begin to really transform this, the foster care system, the child welfare system, and act more like a community. So so that's definitely something I'm working on. I'm trying to, I actually have the really awesome opportunity of being in the room with some really powerful and influential people, specifically like in Washington State, and serving on a Supreme Court commission on children in foster care. So getting to plant these ideas of, hey, what if we do this differently, and like blatantly calling out the racism in our system, because we see, there's a really high number of Black youth that get removed for what I like to call non-issues. So, just approaching these issues very head on, and planting the seed for people who make the laws to do better and really change these systems.
Wow. Again, let's get some hearts and likes in the building. Not only is she addressing her fractures that needed to be mended, but she's working on fractures in the system that need to be mended as well. Now, the first thing I want to go back to out of that is how, a lot of people, they grow up, some people rather, they grow up and they do work in a system that they came out of. And in some cases, they're still hurt. Some people, they've never told their story. There's social workers out there who've never told anybody that they actually grew up in foster care. But you actually went and said, no, I'm going to actually share my story as well, because I deserve closure, I deserve peace of mind, and I deserve to be whole, because the clients that I work with, I'm encouraging them to do that as well. All right. I'm encouraging my clients to step up and speak up for themselves. And I need to do that for myself too. So that's the first thing that's very encouraging. And I'd like for you to revisit how it empowered you once you began to share your story. Talk about how that actually boosted your confidence, because maybe you'll inspire an adult out there who's never told their story before. How did it impact you? How did it make you more powerful when you began to tell your story?
Yeah. So I think one thing I'll start off with is saying that we all have a certain narrative that goes on in our heads, and oftentimes we're very critical of ourselves, unfortunately.
Right.
So I think when you only have that narrative, that's all it is. It's very similar to what I was touching on earlier. But when you bring other people in and you let them see you, first of all, it's finally, for me, it was a sense of acknowledgement of like, wow, I see you. I know who you are. Because I think oftentimes it's kept so secretive, even foster care being confidential and like people not being able to know, like unless you share with them. Just the whole culture around foster care is very isolating. Sorry. And so when I finally did sort of break that and just share like, this is what happened, this is who I am, and then getting some response that was mostly all positive, and like very affirming, just completely made me rethink how I thought about myself and the experiences I went through. They're still the same experiences, but now the mind frame and the narrative in my head has sort of shifted to where I'm not ashamed of anything that happened because it wasn't my fault. And it's really interesting because sometimes I'll get comments like, "You're so brave for talking," and I'm just like, why though? Because it's like that implies that it's something that like I have, had control over, and I haven't. And I get that. I think it's multifaceted, but always approaching it sort of from that angle is something that I've like strived to do. And then yeah, getting that support, and it just feels like now, I have some cheerleaders, so I'm able to really reach my full potential, or like at least start getting there. I don't think there's ever a point where anyone could say, all right, I've reached my full potential, but to keep evaluating that and like pushing harder.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. When you decide to speak out, at first at least, you become a voice for other people who've not spoken out yet, but eventually you become a reason why other people speak out. And the fact of the matter is, we've got to stop keeping foster care a secret.
Yeah.
We're still keeping it a secret. I've met adults who work in Congress whose idea of foster care and what's happening in foster care is far from reality.
Yes, I completely agree.
Yeah, there are a lot of people who are still misinformed or underinformed about what's going on in foster care, and meanwhile, we've got 700,000 youth going through the foster care system every year. 700,000. And so when we say there's 440,000 youth in the foster care system, that's one significant number. But when you realize that almost 750,000 children go through the foster care system every single year, that can't be anybody's secret anymore. People have got to tell their stories. We've got to be able to see one another. Sometimes I go and I talk to people. I say, hey, I want to bring you on my show. We are providing positive stories in hopes of inspiring youth in the foster care system. They say, how did you know I was in foster care? How did you know? No, I didn't know. I'm just looking for positive people. Lo and behold, your secret, one of your biggest secrets, that you were in foster care. That can't be a secret no more.
Yeah.
So what is your belief and your big idea for what you think needs to happen in the child welfare space? What would you like to see happen?
Yeah, thank you. There's so much I'd like to see, but one thing that comes to mind first, since you're just talking about this too, is the misconceptions around foster care, and people not really stepping up. I mean, a lot of people do, but I think we can do better. I have to believe always that we can. Sort of like what I was saying before about reaching our full potential, and like that involves always striving for that. This obviously there's thousands and thousands of folks in care, and we don't have that many foster parents. Like there's a huge shortage, especially in Washington, where kids end up spending nights in hotel rooms or even cars, like with social workers. And
whoa! Did you say kids? Hold on. Did you say that kids are spending the night in the car with their social worker?
Mm-hmm. It's a really big problem here, and many other states too, that there's not placements. And also there's this, in my work and my experience, what I've experienced is there's an imbalance of the people who come into care. Like, quite honestly, I might get some blows from this, but working in the system, it's my experience that I see Black youth coming in for non-issues, like being burned by a hairdryer one time, for example. That has happened. And then, coming into care, so we have this overflow. And then you have like teens like me, where it took 8 years to get someone actually removed. So we have this huge imbalance right now. It's something I'm working on, like, legislatively too. But that's one of the biggest problems. And I think maybe I'm hoping that one of the misunderstandings here is that people don't realize the need exactly. Like, they have this idea of foster care, and maybe they picture, like, the Sleep Country commercials or something like that. Like, and they don't have this realistic idea of like what actually has to happen for someone to get into care. And my hope too is by sharing these real life examples, it really motivates people to be like, that is wrong, and I'm going to do something about it. Because, I'm 25, and I'm just about to move into my first house that I'm in the process of buying, which is really exciting. And as soon as that happens, like, I'm going to become a foster parent. And I don't have a partner. Like, I think a lot of people think so many things need to happen, and that's a myth. Like, there's a lot of ways that you can still support and offer something, sacrifice something, to, like, hold these people up who just need support and love, even if it's just respite. So yeah, I guess that's one place to start. I think that crisis, there's a lot of ripples that it has. Like, for teens, a lot of people that don't have placement, they go to care or even juvenile rehabilitation. So they go to jail or, like I said, treatment centers, facilities. So I want to stop that right in its tracks.
Wow. Now, you also mentioned that you were writing a book.
Yes.
What is the objective of your book?
Yeah, the objective of my book is to sort of bridge that gap, build understanding about, some of the experiences that people in care have, including myself, and some of my clients, and really build understanding so that people can realize, okay, this is something I should probably get involved with. And if anything, just plant a seed to change the way people think or realize the complexity of other people. I think another thing that our systems tend to do is make us minimize the complexity of other people, which makes it easier for our systems to be racist and like sexist and all these different things. So I think building back what humanity is and how people see it hopefully will lead to lifting each other up and supporting one another. So that's my goal.
Let's say that, for the sake of this conversation, that anything that deals with emotions and emotional health, social wellness, good social feelings are all soft stuff.
Okay.
And stuff like budgets, money, bills, funds, funding is all hard stuff. Do you find that a lot of the time, young people who've been in the foster care system are concerned with a lot of soft stuff,
Mm-hmm.
and there's not really a place for the soft stuff to land when you're dealing with people who are in power?
Yes, I completely agree, especially in the US. Well, I guess I can speak with like for Washington. A lot of the data, even just for nonprofits that work with youth in care, are very like quantified. And I don't think that like really the best data can come solely from numbers. I think it has to incorporate people's experiences and what people have lived through to really capture the essence of like the problems that it causes. So that's another thing that I've been working on is just, making sure people acknowledge the importance of that and change the way they collect data. So yeah, I agree with that for sure.
Mm-hmm. What can we do? What can we do about the soft stuff? Because I think that, first of all, you're one of the best and brightest minds in the country right now, and that's why we can have a conversation like this. And I'm really interested in your take. What can we do about this sort of imbalance. Because for me, I think it's an imbalance. It's like maybe in the beginning, like a long time ago, it was like the hard stuff is like the big piece, the big piece of it, and the soft stuff is like kind of like minor. But now I'm feeling overwhelmingly like the soft stuff is like huge now. And
Yeah.
and it seems like it's just easier to continue to focus on the hard stuff when in reality the soft stuff is becoming the bigger issue.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think that maybe one thing that we can do is to start teaching that. Like, we teach a lot of hard skills in, public schools, traditional schools. We don't teach a lot of soft skills necessarily. That's more something that actually parents are sort of, given that responsibility to do, because it's not really taught in schools. And again, when you have families like mine, or like, some of the clients that I work with, it's just not something that's taught. And so, some of us learn from our environment, especially going through everything. But I think if this were taught more in the schools, we'd have a much better like grasp on, like supporting each other and really using those again to for data, so that we can provide better support and have funding too that isn't so tied to one specific thing. I find a lot of funding is very limited. You can't really go beyond the bounds of that. So yeah, it all connects to each other.
Absolutely. We live in a capitalistic America where it's a lot about enterprise. It's a lot about making money, entrepreneurship, and a lot of people just don't got time for the human services stuff.
Yeah.
But what we want to raise awareness about today is that when we have a system that's not working as good as it can, then we end up costing everybody more money than we need to. My
Yeah.
perspective is that if we can get foster care adoption in the child welfare space more efficient, more effective, less abrasive, more careful, then youth in the foster care system, the workers in the foster care system, the industry itself, it can become an asset to society.
Yeah.
Beyond a shadow of a doubt, it can become an asset. The foster care system can not only motivate America, but the foster care system can motivate the rest of the world in regards to how do we treat human beings, how do we correct family structures, how do we build communities, and then how do we build countries, and then oh my God, look at how we fix the world.
Yes, exactly. I don't know if anyone is familiar, but there's this study called ACEs, like the Adverse Childhood Experiences Study. Are you familiar with that?
I've heard of it, but educate me.
Yeah, so it is related to childhood adversity, in other words, trauma, basically, and how that affects people growing up and becoming adults. And they found that people who go through more like adversity tend to be homeless, get pregnant by the time before they're like in a like 20 or whatever, experience with substance abuse, attempt suicide, all these different things, even to chronic health issues like diabetes and heart disease and high cholesterol. It is correlated with all of these things. And it actually would save us millions and millions of dollars if we actually were able to address those things and the adversity and the trauma a lot sooner. And we all know too that it leads to higher like rates of incarceration for people who've experienced those traumatic things. In fact, foster care, the people who've experienced foster care make up a lot of people who are in jails now too. Not to mention, Black folks too, obviously being disproportionately represented in jails. So, if we had the option to address that trauma and that generational trauma too earlier, then we can really prevent like needing all these services and, privatization of jails and all these different things, and save more money with prevention.
Foster care is like that one piece that is feeding systems that if we fix that one piece, we would be correcting systems and we would be making the proper adjustments for humanity. And I love the way that you pointed out the ACEs study, because what I heard you saying is that When we can provide happy, motivational, empowering experiences for people, then their genetic expression changes. Because when you have trauma, your genetic response is, oh, I'm going through trauma, so let me be something traumatic. Let me be a traumatic outcome. Versus once we re-examine the experiences that we're giving people. For instance, I think that providing motivational conferences, dynamic, big time, positive experiences for youth and families and social workers and care could have a positive impact on your genetic experience, and it will make more people turn out like you, turn out like Dave Thomas, turn out like John Lennon. Who are some of your favorite foster care alumni?
Oh gosh, Simone Biles, 100%. I grew up doing
Wow.
gymnastics, and so I love her determination, motivation, all of that. She's the coolest, and there's no one that even compares to her level in gymnastics. So it's just really inspiring. She's definitely my favorite right now.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
So we could have more people like that all throughout the world if we just come together and deal with what we like to see as the soft stuff. It's the soft stuff that we've got to deal with now.
Yeah.
It's the cultural competence. It's diversity and inclusion. It's a good hard look at. Listen, stop putting us in concrete buildings. It's not helping us. Put some carpet under our feet. Put something nice on the walls. Have people coming through speaking positively, like Emily here. Right? Let's all be nice and kind, because when you do that, guess what? I'm going to go out there. I'm going to be the best I can be. I'm going to do the best.
Yeah.
And then if you're like Emily, you're going to come back and you're going to make a positive change in the lives of others.
Thanks.
Now, as we round third base here, I just got a few more questions for you.
Yeah.
But first, I just want to know, what's next for you?
Next for me is finishing my book, which is going to take a little bit of time, probably a couple of years, but I'm really invested in that, on top of my full-time job. So making the time for that, becoming a foster parent, staying involved with everything I'm doing with the volunteering and, outside of work hours, also doing everything else that I do with the advocacy stuff. And yeah, just a lot of that stuff, I guess.
Anybody you want to say thank you today or a shout out today?
I'd say, gosh, just everyone who has supported in any sort of way. That sounds so cliche now that I'm saying it out loud, but really, I've just really been honored to have anyone in my life who has, even just been encouraging at any point. And mostly, especially as I've become more verbal about my own experiences, just encouraging that without wavering at all has really, changed. I think could have changed like how or if I decided to doing what I'm doing and all these different things. At the end of the day, I think I'd find myself here, but I feel proud of where I am, and I don't think I'd feel that way if I didn't have like some of these people.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Chastity Curry says best wishes.
Thank you.
We're really proud of you today. Now, what is survival to you?
Yeah, survival to me is doing what you need to do to get through. Pretty generally stating there, but
what is success to you?
Success is to me conquering challenges that sort of come your way, regardless of how you have to do it, I think. But well, actually, I'll say like doing it with strong morals too, like always evaluating what's right. I think oftentimes too, we don't necessarily think about how to do things in the best way. We want to do what's easiest, and that again is an idea that's passed down through the way our systems are. But if we evaluate our standpoint of why do we want to do things a certain way and making sure that it's the most true to our humanity and our morals, I think like that is the best way you can be successful.
Right now, there's a young lady in foster care who looks like you, and she kind of sort of resembles you, and she's going through a tough time right now. What would you say to her?
I would say, gosh, I'm trying to think of things that don't sound cliche, but just keep looking forward. I think one thing I needed to hear when I was in foster care was like, the world is going to be like your oyster when you know, turn of age where you don't have to like have other people sort of control or have ownership over like what you choose to do and what you can and can't do. So just think about like things you want to do. I think a lot of the things too that I was doing was planning for my future, like all the things that I would do that I couldn't do at the time because I didn't have the power to do it. So I'd say planning that. The best thing you can do for yourself and for other people is to start planning what you want to do for your career and like how you want to make an impact and the person that you want to be.
Mm-hmm. What's greatness to you?
Greatness to me is like I think living as your best self. I talked a little bit about like, you know, upholding a moral compass and character. To me, that's really important because I never want to forget my humanity or anyone else's. Like I want to be able to see people as people and all their complexity. So to me, it's recognizing that complexity and constantly living by that, constantly evaluating myself and making sure that I'm being the best person that I can be, and then admitting when I'm wrong and learning and changing and being better.
Mm-hmm. Emily Stochel, I want to let you know that I've listened to your story today. I've been inspired by how you overcame adversity. You kept pushing, and then you came back to help other people. I want to give you a crown today while you're still living. Ladies and gentlemen, put your crowns in the chat so we can give them to Emily. We're giving you a crown today while you're still living, giving you your respect while you can still acknowledge it, letting you know, letting the world know that you, Emily Stochel, are America's next motivator.
Thank you so much. I'm very honored.
Absolutely. Thanks for stopping by today, all right?
Thanks so much. Have a great day.
All right. Talk to you soon. Ladies and gentlemen, there you have it. Each and every episode of America's Next Motivator is going to have something here for you. All you've got to do, just like you did today, is stop by and pick it up.